The one thing that we didn't speak about is process, as in how is it getting deployed, right? So when UrbanCode does the deployment, at the first instance, you would have to create your application processes, which says how the components have to be deployed. At a high level, imagine an application process like a JCL calls procs to do the work that has to be done. So you call, in this case, you can see that the DB2 gets called and then the CSS gets called and client, the Java client gets called. So these are component level processes. I will show you a sample component level process. But at this point, what you need to get is that an application process understands this flow and then calls the component level process. So a process in UrbanCode is usually a drag and drop. It's like a flow chart. You bring it in, you say, hey, in case of success, go here. You can even say, hey, in case of failure, go here. So if you change this box to this, then only if it's failure, it goes there. But yeah, so I set it back to success. So that's the application level process. And then we go back to the components. Let me show you a component level process. So I go to this market DB2, and then I go to processes. I have a create database objects process. So I go inside and see what it does. Basically, it takes, so I'll explain this, but at a high level again, component processes have individual tasks. You will see a lot more tasks when you design a component process than an application process. We have multiple plugins which provide you easier way to communicate with other tools, middlewares, and all that. So you can talk to Jira, you can talk to ServiceNow, you can talk to MQ to do something. So we have plugins for each one of them. So as you install the plugins, these tasks, the left side that you see, it will get populated with those plugin steps. So you can search here and say do something. So I want to create a zip. I search for a zip. It will get me. It will show me how some processes that I can use to create a zip file, right? So create a zip file or unzip it and kind of file utilities. So similarly, we have both GUI specific plugin steps and non-GUI specific plugin steps, which you can run in USS and do your automate your deployment process. So let's come back to this process. I'll just explain this one, but this is a typical middleware deployment, but even a core deployment is similar to this. Usually a component process starts with the download artifacts, where it gets what has to be deployed from some artifact repository. In this one, it gets it from CodeStation, which is UrbanCode deploys internal artifact repository. But you can always store this in an Nexus or an Artifactory or whatever other artifact repositories that you might have. Download those artifacts to the target environment. What does the replace token do? Replace tokens is the way in which you can parameterize your artifacts in UrbanCode deploy. So let's say you have a DB2 query to create a table. Obviously, you don't want to have multiple versions of it based on the environment. You want to have one version, and that version has to be customized for that environment before it gets deployed, before the table gets created. So in this case, what you will do is you will come on the environments where I was showing you the different environments at an application level, like here. You will configure and say in dev, if you ever deploy DB2 queries, always use my creator name as dev. So similarly, QA, you might have something, pre-prod, you might have something, and prod, you might have something. So you configure this one time, the first setup, or that in any kind of DB2 queries that gets runs against this environment should replace this token. Let's say in this case, I say the token is ampersand owner ampersand. So in your source control for the DB2 table creations, you will create the query and say at the place of owner, you will just say ampersand owner ampersand. And when you come back to the replace tokens, this step would take care of the idea of changing the user, the owner ID, and then running it on the target. This way, you just have one source code across all your environments, the one source of truth on your source control. And then for each of these environments, you configure it, and then based on the configuration, UrbanCode deploy changes the query. modifies the query and then runs it against it. We really don't do functional modifications. It is pure play replace tokens. So it just searches for a particular token, replaces those tokens. It does that, and then it checks whether the DB object exists. Let's say I'm adding a column, then it checks whether the tables exist. Before we add a column, we have to make sure the table exists. And here it actually uses an impersonation using past ticket, and then it runs. If everything looks okay, then it runs those execute queries, collects the statistics for that query, and then finishes the process. So that's a very small component process which does for the DB2 deployments. But again, similarly, if you are doing a code load library, DBRM based deployments, it would again do a download artifacts. We have something called deploy datasets. So it will search for your, it will use this deploy dataset step and deploy to datasets. And then it can do new copies. It can do DB2 binds. I'll show you a sample that I've run where there is a new copy DB2 bind is being done. So you would basically use this drag and drop interface and create your deployment process. And this interface can also talk to the newer tools like Jira or ServiceNow. So you want to do a production deployment and you say that I have to check the ServiceNow and see whether the ServiceNow ticket is approved before I do this. That would be the first step. Even before download artifacts, you go to ServiceNow, you check whether the ticket is approved. Only if it's approved, then the process goes beyond that. And QA, you do a testing and then you say, hey, Jira has to be updated that the QA deployment was successful. At the end of this, you again update Jira, like you have a Jira plugin, you use that and you update Jira saying the deployment is done. You can even trigger it from Jira. We have REST APIs to trigger these processes. So when someone changes a status in Jira from A to B, you can trigger a deployment to a particular region. So we have very tight integration with all this SDLC tools, as well as we have integrations for all the deployment processes. So that's how the deployment process works.